there is a very strange lack of transparency, and even the environmentalists are complaining over this. They are. It looks like they are not entirely understanding what's going on, and they are complaining about the secrecy, and they are not allowed to participate in some negotiations. It looks like they are beginning to understand that the agenda is not necessarily what they have thought it was.
The environmental movement is in for quite a shock, I think, because they had hoped, the left-wing end of it, which means most of it, that there would be a world government, that it would be effectively a Marxist world government. That's what the communist flags were in the street for in such large numbers on Saturday. When I first used the word communist in this process, everybody said, "Oh, you can't use words like that, that's such an insult." But that's what it is. And now we can see it with the hammer and sickle flags and the red flags out on the street. But of course, they are right that since all of this conference is merely for show, the real decisions have been taken somewhere else already and will be only announced at the end of this conference. Of course there's no transparency. When I first tried to get a copy of the draft treaty, the negotiating text as it's called, at the beginning of this conference, because of course you always have to have some sort of written document to talk about. If you're trying to draw up a written document, you have some idea of what's going to be in it. They've had several previous negotiating rounds in different expensive and exotic and congenial parts of the world before they got here. It's been going on for months, all this, years in fact. So of course they had a negotiating text, but when I asked for it at the official documentation centre of the Conference of the States Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, they looked at me as though I were from outer space, and they said, "What do you mean, a negotiating text? Of course we don't have a negotiating text." And I said, "Well, of course you do have a negotiating text. I've seen the earlier draft, dated September the 15th. There was another one in May. There was another one in October. There was another one in November. I want the latest one, December, which is the one that they're going to be starting with at this conference today. And I want it today." And they said, "Well, but there's no such thing as a negotiating text. That's not what this conference is all about." Well, to some extent they were right, of course. This conference is merely for theatre. The negotiating text has largely been agreed. But nevertheless, I persisted. And I said, "I'm not letting go. You either produce this text, or I will throw all my toys out of the pram, and I will create an international diplomatic incident. You are refusing a legislator from one of the countries participating in this process the chance to see the negotiating text that his country is negotiating. Do you realise how serious this is?" "Oh," they said, "I'd better speak to my supervisor." So they went to see the supervisor, who said, negotiating text, we don't have a negotiating text." "Yes, you do," I said, "and you know it. And I want it, and I want it now." So with a very bad grace, they said, "Oh well, yeah, we do have this stack of papers that we give to people who really ask." And this stack of papers, it was maybe that thick, 4 inches, 10 centimetres thick paper.
It's growing.
Huge stack of paper. Most of it was old paper. And I had to go all the way through it until right at the bottom, hidden underneath all the rest of this stack of paper, was the 20 or 30 pages which was actually entitled Draft Negotiating Text. So all this pretense that there was no such thing was just a fiction. They didn't want people to see it. And when I read it, I saw why. Because although they've taken out the word world government, they had the word government in the treaty before, they've taken that out. Although they no longer call it a treaty, all the elements are still there of an enormous series of interlocking, literally 600 or 700 new bureaucracies, not just the bureaucrats, bureaucracies. Several in each country, several centred around the Conference of the States Parties to the Convention, and this interlocking network of bureaucracies, that is what's going to be the new world government. And that has survived in every draft of the treaty since then, because I went back a few days later and said, now I'd like an updated draft of the agreement as it's now become, in the light of the negotiations that are said to have taken place here in the last few days. Please can I have the updated draft? And this time they not only denied that they had an updated draft, but they also denied that there had ever been a draft negotiating text, even though they had given it to me a few days previously. So the sheer lunacy with which they're trying to conceal from the public what is actually being done here and what has been done behind closed doors before they got here is very interesting. So then I made another fuss and I said, look, I could either come back here day after day and this will just become a growing scandal, or you've got to do something about it. And I said the best thing you can do is put up the negotiating text on the internet for everyone to see and stop trying to keep it secret. So that, at last, they did, and the latest text is now on the internet and you can look at it there. But it took nearly a week before I could persuade them that they couldn't get away with their instinctive habit at the UN of keeping everything secret.